one of the best people in startups is Brad Feld, who started Techstars. He feels like this is a bit more like 2000 than it is 2008, 2009, and I think that's true. And that's because there's like a generation or two of people that have come out of university and have never experienced a downturn. Arguably, all of their experiences in one of the biggest and longest bull markets, their entire context is everything is like up and to the right. And so, now it's not up and to the right anymore. So it's kind of a wake-up call.
Welcome to International Business Today, where we discuss the most critical topics in international business with today's top academic experts and thought leaders. I'm Paula Caligiuri, professor in the International Business and Strategy Group at Northeastern University's Tamr McKim School of Business. Today's topic is by popular request. We heard from many who asked to know more about launching, operating, and investing in startups during this shaky economy. And you wanted to learn about this from the inside. There is no better guest for this topic than my favorite serial entrepreneur, Andy Palmer. Andy is the co-founder and CEO of Tamr and has funded or founded over 100 companies through his seed fund, Koa Labs. He has been awarded Angel Investor of the Year and Entrepreneur of the Year and a lot of accolades I don't have time to talk about, but it is my great pleasure to introduce Andy Palmer. Andy, welcome to International Business Today.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here with you.
This is such an interesting time to be talking about this, right? The economy is a mess. We have high inflation, low unemployment. The market is really volatile. Yet you're out there in a pretty big way saying that this is an opportunity for would-be entrepreneurs. Can you tell us a little more about that?
You bet. Well, we've seen these cycles before, and there's always great times and lean times. And oftentimes what we see is that when companies are started during a downturn, the people that are starting those companies, the entrepreneurs, are really mission driven and really committed to whatever it is they're doing. They're not caught up in a lot of hype or an irrationally positive economy. They really want to be starting something from scratch. So the character of these startups and the entrepreneurs that start companies during times like this almost always are the kind of character it takes to survive and thrive in the long term. So we love backing companies during times like this.
Really? And do you look for something? I know you said certainly character and passion. Is there something else you're looking for, especially during this kind of an economy?
Yeah, the capital efficiency. I really believe in capital efficiency. And, it's tempting sometimes for these companies that raise a lot of venture capital to spend like crazy. But almost always, the best companies that I invest in or that I help found are really focused on making sure they get the most out of every single dollar that they spend. And so when you're starting in lean times, when things are more difficult, there's just an eye towards capital efficiency that matters a lot. It's almost impossible during times like this for companies to raise a bunch of money and spend like drunken sailors.
True. And you're able to see that as a pre-seed investor. You're able to assess that?
And again, as an investor, it's much easier to see that during times like this because there's less noise. When times are good and there's lots of money flowing and lots of people are interested in being entrepreneurs, it's tough sometimes to see which ones really have the character and are really committed to it versus, who's, sort of got everything that it takes to get through in the long term. So it's this, delicate balance of like sifting through all the noise, and there's just a lot less noise during tough times.
And you've been through this before, right?
Yeah.
The internet crash in 2000, the housing crash in 2008.
Yep.
Is it different this time? I mean, it feels so volatile. Does it feel different?
Yeah, one of the best people in startups is Brad Feld, who started Techstars. And, I heard Brad the other day say that he feels like this is a bit more like 2000 than it is 2008, 2009. And I think that's true. And that's because there's like a generation or two of people that have come out of university and have never experienced a downturn. Arguably, all of their experience experience is in one of the biggest and longest bull markets, in history as we've seen it. And so their entire context is everything is like up and to the right. And so, now it's not up and to the right anymore. So it's kind of a wake-up call for a lot of folks. And again, when that happens, you sort of see people's true character comes out.
And so in this case, then, experience matters, right? So now you're actually having to look to those who have lived through the 2000 market to be able to guide those who haven't.
Yeah, and at Koa, we really focus on backing first-time entrepreneurs. And so for many of those first-time entrepreneurs, they've never experienced a down market like this. And so they're prone to, be looking for guidance and direction of like, what do you do next? And the first thing that, we tell most of our companies is, all right, it's time to scale back. If you have the ability to control your spend, now is the time to crank it back. And if you have creative opportunities to get cash in ways that you might not have otherwise, go for it. Like put as much cash on the balance sheet as you possibly can to weather the storm.
Yeah, it's such great advice. So Andy, this is international business today, and when in your world, in the VC world, it seems like for years it used to be that when we talked about raising money, entrepreneurs would look very locally. It was a hyper-local activity. But in the past decade, that seems to have changed. And we're not just, we're here in Boston, we're looking to Cambridge. We're here in Boston looking around the world for investors. What have you seen, and what describe that change?
Yeah, well, it's a really fascinating change in the last 20 years, especially here in Boston, because one of my really good friends and mentors, Peter Barris, who's the chairman over at NEA, when he took over NEA back in the late 90s, he was kind of anticipating that there'd be sort of a bifurcation in venture, that you'd have over time a small number of very large international venture firms like NEA has become, and Sequoia and Andreessen Horowitz. These are massive, massive funds with huge amounts of resource, and they operate, in all the best startup communities all over the world. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have a lot of smaller funds that were focused on either a certain stage or a certain industry or a certain hypothesis. And I think that's happened, and it's especially acute here in Boston, because in Boston we had a lot of mid-sized regional generalist kind of funds. And so as that change has occurred in venture, in the distribution of venture funds, we've lost a lot of, those old mid-sized regional funds. And instead, what we've got is a population of much earlier stage funds, which I think is aligned to our community. Here in Boston, this is a great place to birth companies. Like we have an amazing quantity of intellectual property at all the universities in Boston, especially Northeastern.
That's right.
But we really, have seen that the mix of invested capital in Boston has leaned a bit more towards the earlier stage, seed and pre-seed, as you've had these specialized funds. And that's really good for our community here. And when it comes time for those companies that have been seeded or pre-seeded by the more local funds to raise their Series A capital, they think of it not as like going to the usual typical Boston Series A venture investors, but rather they think about it as at least a national search for their next round of capital. And so it's easy to get on a plane and go to New York or go to California. And a lot of those investors, like the NEAs and Sequoias and Andreessen Horowitzes of the world, they're used to investing in Boston, and they come here quite frequently now. So venture capital has become less local, more at least national, if not global. But this early stage capital is very, very hyper local.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's both the idea of a certain mentality around raising the money, but also the entrepreneurs themselves. And I know you differentially invest in women and immigrant-owned businesses. You differentially invest in healthcare tech, which is great. Is there something common among the spirit of the entrepreneur that you see, that you try to invest in, that you're looking for? So it's not just that fiscal conservative approach to or passion, but is there something you're looking for in a would-be entrepreneur?
Yeah, for me, this ability and willingness to overcome all odds and to set expectations really high is sort of a core principle. And oftentimes, as we started investing in underserved communities, mostly women, immigrants, and people of color, it was remarkable how much drive there was, and this is almost always sort of notable in the immigrant community, and amongst young entrepreneurial women, because like they're doing whatever it takes to succeed, and it really was a massively underserved group of entrepreneurs. And, we love investing in underserved communities to help, do whatever we can to empower them. But the reality is they build amazing businesses. And so the financial returns have been remarkable in investing and backing these folks. And I think that's becoming mainstream now in investing, that, it feels less and less like impact investing or something special. And it's just backing the best entrepreneurs, and a lot of them happen to be women, immigrants, and people of color.
Yeah. Well, as a child of an immigrant, we learn to be a little scrappy, right? When you don't have enough, you learn to be
exactly
do with what's available.
I
right?
believe, again, back to the scarcity creates clarity. Like the more capital efficient companies are in the early stages, the better.
Okay. What if somebody had that mentality, right? They're sort of a would-be entrepreneur, but they're currently employed. I know you talk a lot about entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? So how do I have an entrepreneurial spirit if I'm working for a multinational, working for an organization?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways to be creative and entrepreneurial, regardless of who your employer is. And this willingness and commitment to do things that other people think can't be done are very powerful. And the most successful folks that I've experienced in large companies tend to be those folks that, even despite the bureaucracy and kind of the infrastructure that exists in a lot of these bigger companies, that if they kind of go for it and they, do things that other people that are maybe just punching the clock at those companies think are impossible, that, great companies will reward that, very, very, very aggressively. And you don't have to go much, very far into the depths of business school cases to find this stuff, right? The classic example is Jack Welch at GE way back in the day when he started GE Plastics, right? Plastics grew from almost, zero, to be one of the biggest divisions of GE, because Jack and the whole team there thought that they could grow it at a rate that was previously unheard of within GE. And then they started applying those same kind of expectations across the rest of the company. And so inside of a large organization, I think the biggest impact that people that are entrepreneurial can have is by setting expectations higher and not just punching the clock or accepting whatever's been done the previous year or the previous decade, or in some cases the previous century, but rather setting expectations high and looking to the future rather than sort of sitting on the laurels of the past.
Yeah, it's a willingness to say what else could be, what else could be possible.
Exactly.
Really,
and of course, for me, no better role model in our economy today, I think, than Elon Musk. I mean, the expectations that he has set, whether it's changing the automotive industry to electric, or landing rockets, back on the ground. I mean, these are things that even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people thought were impossible feats. And he's not only accomplished them, but turned all of these things into, a new reality for us.
Right. And I would say also, though, investing in yourself, that you can also make that contribution.
Yeah.
That's something you and I have also talked about.
Yeah,
really,
for sure.
Really critical. So, Andy, you're a CEO of Tamr, and I know you give us great advice about would-be entrepreneurs who are working in organizations. But right now, there's also a lot of layoffs going on. Can you tell us, what advice would you give to people who are being laid off, especially those in tech?
Absolutely. Well, it's an interesting time. My first advice is have hope, because the reality is the unemployment figures have never been better. We're very employed as an overall economy. And so there are a lot of jobs out there. Now, what's happening is there's lots of layoffs going on, but those layoffs are just adjustments and optimizations that are occurring across the economy. So even though people are getting laid off, they're also finding new jobs very, very quickly. And so especially for young folks, the way that they should interpret this is there's a lot of change going on, and change is always good for people that are less experienced. There are lots of opportunities to slot into new organizations and or new parts of existing existing organizations. And so I think it's a great time to be job seeking right now. Again, because unemployment is so low. There's a lot of demand, especially for young folks.
And it's also a great time to be investing back in yourself on those new skills, new talents that are needed.
Totally. I think that's exactly right. And like I'm a big believer in, as continuous education. And everyone's career, I think, is better when they view their career as an opportunity for continuous education. Everything they're doing, every job that they take, I think of it as like a tour of duty. And in that tour of duty, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you try and learn as much as you can on every single tour of duty. And, it's less like a job that you might hold in perpetuity forever. I think that concept is kind of an artificial construct of the industrial era. Like, people want new projects to work on. They want new challenges all the time. And so thinking about your career as a succession of these tours of duty is a much healthier way to view that. And when you embrace that, you're like, okay, well, I'm going to have some numbers of tours of duty over the course of some numbers of decades and do all kinds of cool, interesting things along the way, each one sort of teaching you something different and new and being stimulating, again, as opposed to sitting at a desk and turning the crank for decades.
Yeah. And you and I have also spoken about, stay in control of your career, make sure you're the one guiding it. So even if you are laid off, even if you do have to make the next move, you kind of know where you want to tack next or what skills you need next and what's the next tour of duty, in your words.
Exactly. Like, I've learned a lot of this from you, like this idea that, each person is the captain of their future and each person is sort of capable of guiding where they go. And what we really people should avoid, especially if people are working in big companies, is thinking of their employer in this paternalistic way, as if the employer is going to, guide them in some way. Now, maybe that happens in a good way. And a lot of employers want to try and help. But the reality is, if you don't depend on whoever your manager is or whatever company you're working for, but rather you take control of your own destiny, then it kind of doesn't matter if you've got a good manager or a bad manager or a good company or a bad company. You will always be in control and you'll be able to guide your personal ship into whatever tour of duty makes the most sense for you next.
Yeah, it is so critical that we don't relinquish control to our company over what's coming next in our careers. We stay in control of that. And it might be within that company, but we still have to be driving.
And it's part of it is a reflection of American society. Like, we've always believed in rugged individualism, and so I think that principle of rugged individualism is very, very appropriate and well applied when people guide their careers. Don't just, drop into a big company and put it on autopilot, because who knows where you'll end up.
What's interesting about individualism, it's one of the cultural values that we're starting to see worldwide increase among well-educated people around the world. So it's not just an American thing anymore.
Totally.
So it's kind of another interesting piece. Okay, another very different question. Sort of the headlines of today, right? Silicon Valley Bank, Credit Suisse. There's just a lot of rough times, right, for banking. How is this affecting both sort of the VC world, but also how is it affecting your portfolio of companies?
Yeah, it's really remarkable. And SVB has been an instrumental part of all the innovation that's occurred in our economy in the U.S. over the last 30 or 40 years. And so in some ways, it's sort of rocked us all to the core. Like, we've really it's been a bit of a wake-up call, but also a little bit healthy. How these early stage companies are financed and how you bank to them and how you support them financially is a really important part of the equation. And in some ways, this change has sort of brought, Silicon Valley Bank and, the mojo in the Bay Area a bit closer to New York and Wall Street, and also brought New York and Wall Street a bit closer to the Bay Area. And I think that's a really healthy thing. That the more transparency and openness there is between these different cultures of all the kind of the moneyed interests in New York and all the entrepreneurial and new money sort of interests on the West Coast, I think the more those kind of like work together, the better off we are. And you've definitely seen this, right? As Silicon Valley Bank's gone through a really hard time and come out the other end. One of the remarkable things that I've seen is a lot of the leadership in the more traditional banks coming together around Silicon Valley Bank to help make them successful, and recognizing that they play such an important role in our innovation economy that it's really, and it's an international thing. Like the changes at SVB have had an impact, not only on, the banks in the United States, but even now Credit Suisse and a whole bunch of, so, we're all connected. In this world, and the innovation that happens sort of spreads all over the world. Again, Elon Musk is a great example. You look at what's happening in automotive and in the space industry, aerospace industries, all over the world, all very connected to the bar that Elon Musk has set. And also, like on the banking side, like when one change happens somewhere, like it reverberates throughout the rest of the world. And of course, this is also true when you have, a geopolitical conflict. You look at what's been happening in the Ukraine and how difficult that is. But you also see a lot of, forces coming together from all over the world to support the Ukraine and what they're going through. And so more and more, we are all interconnected, and this is true financially. It's true entrepreneurially. At Tamr early on, we had this experience where a lot of our customers, these very, very large companies, and the traditional rule of thumb in early stage software companies is you stay focused on one geography. But many of our customers were doing projects that were all over the world, and so we were dragged, sort of kicking and screaming initially into being a global company out of the box. But I think that's more the norm now, that, startups have to kind of think globally out of the box rather than, just sort of staying local.
Yeah, it's another attribute to look for among your future entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The best
cultural agility.
Truly. And this is a huge advantage, I think, that young entrepreneurs have in our innovation economy, is that many of them are sort of global by default. Like, you look at, the talent that we see coming out of Northeastern all the time. It's one of the most diverse communities I've ever experienced. And the cool part about Northeastern is when they come out, they've got, not only are they diverse in terms of geography, but their experience is so extreme. Many of them have worked for a number of great companies doing really cool things. And so graduating at 21 or 22 years old, they had way more experience than I ever did at that age. That's for sure.
Right. I know we're part of the International Business Group, and our students come out with also multiple international experiences, multiple co-ops, different diverse industries, geographies. It is pretty impressive.
Very cool.
Good things to look for. So let's talk about advice. Let's wrap this up with some advice.
Okay.
Let's do first advice to those who are investors like you. What advice would you give to your fellow investors for this kind of an economy?
Yeah, well, this is, these moments are very critical, right? Like, I didn't, I appreciated my business school experience up at Dartmouth, but maybe the most important lesson I learned was buy low and sell high. And so right now, prices are pretty low. So it's a pretty good time to buy into the market, even though emotionally it may be the most difficult to sort of lean in. Now is the time where you want to sort of buy equities and lean into, potential upside, even though it's hard emotionally. And so that, I think is the, the most important thing, is that, sort of you can't always let the macro economy sort of influence your emotions and your actions. You have to do what's important to you and kind of believe in yourself during times like this. And I think it's the time for people, especially entrepreneurs, to kind of double down on themselves. Yeah. And as they do that, I think it's also, really, really valuable to again have this capital efficient perspective. Like, don't view this downturn as a as a problem, but rather view it as an opportunity to get more efficient, to get more productive, and to help limit the noise, filter out all the noise, and focus on the things that are the most important to do.
Yeah, have courage and make smart decisions.
Yes, right, exactly. Really yes.
And so that the final piece of advice then for the would-be entrepreneur out there who's listening, do you have any?
Yeah. So my favorite thing with especially young entrepreneurs is to, really, focus on your mission. Like anytime I'm working with new young entrepreneurs and I ask them, what's your primary motivation? What are you interested in? When they respond, well, I want to make money. I'm like, that's not a great reason to start a company from scratch, right? The odds are, if you look at the risk adjusted, returns on startups, it's pretty tough. You may be better off like going into finance or working at a hedge fund or something if all you really care about is money. But if you're mission driven, you care about building things and you care about making the world a better place, and also creating a fulfilling experience for yourself where you can look back and say, man, I am really proud of what I built, and I'm proud that what I've built satisfies customers or makes money for my shareholders. That's the most important thing. And this is where, again, I think people like Elon Musk are a great role model. There's always lots of money involved whenever Elon's doing stuff, but the reality is what motivates him is his mission. He's trying to make us an interplanetary species. He's trying to improve, the way that the automotive industry, has a carbon footprint. And so these motivations, these visions and missions, like that's the real motivational. That's the important stuff to focus on.
Wow, it's such great advice. Have purpose.
Have purpose, yeah.
Andy, this was terrific. Thank you so much for being a part of International Business Today.
Thanks, Paula. It's been a lot of fun. Great to see you again.
Nice seeing you.
All right.
To our listeners and viewers, thank you for being a part of International Business Today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to it and share it with your network. As always, we'd love to hear from you.